Jay wiped a grimy sleeve across his forehead, leaving a new smear of grease on his skin. The air in the scrapyard was always thick with the smell of rust, ozone, and old metal. It was a cold smell, a dead smell. He stood in a canyon of forgotten things, under the dim purple light of the planetoid's night. Giant, broken machines rose on either side of him like sleeping metal monsters. His job was simple: sort, scan, and crush. The big magnet cranes above did the heavy lifting, dropping piles of space junk into his sector. He had to go through it piece by piece, pulling out anything that might still have a flicker of life or a scrap of valuable material. The rest went into the smelter, a giant mouth that glowed orange day and night, eating metal and spitting out clean, boring ingots. It was lonely, quiet work. The perfect job for someone who didn't mind being alone with his thoughts. Jay was a young man from Korea, but Earth felt like a dream from another life. Out here, on the edge of known space, he was just another pair of hands. He preferred the night shift. The day crew was louder, and the foreman liked to shout. At night, it was just him, the humming machinery, and the silent stars. Tonight, the pile was from a human ship. The identification tag, barely readable, said UNS Perseverance. Jay felt a small, familiar pang. It was rare to get human wreckage. It made the vast, impersonal scrapyard feel a little smaller, a little closer to home. He set to work with his plasma cutter, its blue flame slicing through twisted beams and shattered plating. Most of it was just bulkhead shredded by weapons fire. Nothing useful. Then his cutter jammed. He cursed softly, pulling the heavy tool back. It had snagged on a particularly thick piece of armor, wedged itself deep into a seam. He yanked at it, but it was stuck fast. Annoyed, he grabbed a pry bar from his belt. He shoved the sharp end into the seam next to his cutter and leaned his whole weight into it. The metal groaned, a long, tired sound. With a final, sharp crack, a whole section of the panel broke away, clattering to the floor. Inside the newly opened cavity, nestled among a nest of severed wires and broken circuits, was a helmet that was an old model, the kind he hadn't seen since basic training videos. It was a full infantry helmet, scuffed and scarred from countless impacts. One side was blackened, as if by fire. The visor was a dark, smoked color, and it was cracked in a spiderweb pattern. It looked heavy, useless, and completely dead. By all rights, it belonged in the smelter. It was just more junk. But something made him stop. He reached in and pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it over in his hands. There were no lights, no power indicators. It was just a lump of molded composite and metal. On the back, stenciled in faded white letters, was a name. Jay stood there for a long moment, holding the helmet. He imagined the person who wore it. A soldier named Tay. Did he have a family? What was he like? The official report for the Perseverance would just say, "Lost with all hands." This helmet was the only thing left to prove that a man named Tay had ever existed, that he couldn't do it. He couldn't throw it into the glowing mouth of the smelter. It felt like throwing a person into a fire. Instead, he tucked the helmet under his arm. He freed his plasma cutter, finished his scan of the pile, and sent the rest of the metal on its final journey. When the shift-end bell chimed, he walked back to his small, boxy habitation module, the helmet held tightly against his side. The module was just one room. A bed, a small kitchen unit, a table, and a workbench covered in his personal tools and scavenged parts. He placed the helmet on the table. Under the bright, clean light of his room, it looked even more battered. It was a relic. He got a clean cloth and a basin of water. He began to wipe away the grime and soot. He was careful around the cracked visor. He polished the scarred surface, not to make it new, but to show it some respect. As he cleaned the brow of the helmet, his fingers found a rough, broken edge. He looked closer. It was a data port, a standard military interface, but it was cracked and filled with dust. He found a can of compressed air and a fine probe from his toolkit. He carefully blew the dust out of the port and gently picked away the tiny fragments of debris. It was a long shot. The helmet had no power. It was probably brain dead. He found a universal power adapter and a data lead. He plugged the adapter into the wall and gently connected the other end to the helmet's port. There was no click, no hum, no sign of life. He sighed. Maybe it was just a piece of junk after all. He was about to disconnect it when his hand brushed against the side of the helmet. A small, almost invisible seam on the temple glowed a faint blue for a second. A spark. Jay pulled his hand back. He stared. The blue light faded. He reached out and touched the same spot again. Nothing. He was about to give up when a flickering, ghostly light erupted from the helmet's brow. It was a hologram, shaky and full of static, like a bad signal. It projected the face of a young woman. She had dark hair and kind eyes, but her face was twisted in pure terror. Her mouth was open in a scream. Behind her, Jay could see the chaotic, blurry background of a ship's corridor, with red emergency lights flashing. And he could hear it. Faintly, as if from a great distance, he heard the sound. It was the roar of an explosion, the shriek of tearing metal, and the high-pitched whine of energy weapons. It was the sound of a battle, happening right there in his quiet room. The woman's screaming mouth formed a name. He couldn't hear it over the noise, but he could see the shape of the word on her lips. It was 2 syllables. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the hologram vanished. The sound cut out. The helmet was just a silent, scarred object on his table again. The silence in the room was now heavy and deep. Jay's heart was pounding in his chest. He could still see the woman's terrified face burned into his vision. He looked around his small, safe room. Everything was normal. His bed was made. His tools were neatly arranged. But everything felt different. He stared at the helmet. It wasn't just a piece of junk. It wasn't just a memory. It was a witness. It had seen things. It had recorded the final, terrible moments of its owner's life. The helmet remembered, and Jay now knew that it would never, ever forget. The silence after the hologram vanished felt louder than the explosion. Jay sat at his workbench, not moving, for a long time. He just stared at the helmet. It was no longer a piece of scrap. It was a coffin for a ghost. The woman's terrified face was painted on the inside of his eyes. He could still see her. He could still almost hear the faint echo of that battle. He knew he should report it. Any functional, especially volatile, memory core from a military wreck was supposed to be handed over to the foreman. It was union policy, but the thought of giving the helmet to the bored, uninterested foreman made his stomach twist. They would just wipe it, study it for tactical data, and then toss the empty shell. The memory of that woman, of the soldier named Tay, would be erased forever. It would become data. It would cease to be a story. Jay made a decision. He would not report it. Not yet. His next shift felt longer than any before. Every clang of metal, every hiss of the smelter, made him jump. He worked quickly, mechanically, his mind back in his room with the helmet. The moment his shift ended, he hurried back, not even stopping for food. He sat back down at his workbench. The helmet sat where he left it. It looked inert, harmless. He reached out a hand, hesitating for a second before his fingers touched the cold, scarred surface. Nothing happened. It was just metal and plastic again. He needed to see more. He needed to understand. Jay was not an engineer, but years in the scrapyard had taught him how things worked. He knew how to take them apart and sometimes how to put them back together. He gathered his tools: fine-tip drivers, microsoldering iron, magnifying lenses, and a small diagnostic scanner he had rebuilt from broken parts. His first task was to get a stable power source to the helmet. The internal battery was long dead. The cracked port was the main problem. He spent hours under the bright light of his magnifying lamp, carefully cleaning the broken connector. He used a tiny amount of conductive gel, painstakingly bridging the fractured lines. He then soldered a fresh power lead directly to the internal circuits, bypassing the broken port entirely. He connected it to a small, regulated power cell. He held his breath and switched the cell on. A tiny, steady green light glowed to life on the helmet's temple. It was weak, but it was there. The helmet had power. His diagnostic scanner chirped, establishing a basic link. Text scrolled across its small screen. System boot. Error. Memory core fragmented. Neural lock protocol active. Neural lock. Jay had heard of that. An old, mostly abandoned system. It was designed to record a soldier's sensory and cognitive data in their final moments of extreme stress. A tool for after-action reports, or for finding out what went wrong in a disaster. It was a black box for a human brain. The data was there, but it was a mess. It was like a book whose pages had been scattered by a storm. He couldn't just play a video. The memory was stored in a raw, unstructured format, tied to the wearer's dying brainwaves. He needed an interface. A direct neural link was out of the question. He didn't have the equipment or the desire to hook the helmet to his own head. But he found another way. The helmet had a short-range, low-power emitter designed to sync with other squad members' gear. He could try to piggyback on that signal. It took him 2 more days of work. He cobbled together a receiver from an old entertainment visor and a communication node. It was a clumsy device, a tangle of wires and chips held together with tape, but he thought it might work. He placed the device on his head, not unlike the helmet itself. It covered his eyes and rested against his temples. He sat in his chair, the helmet on the table in front of him. He took a deep breath. His finger hovered over the power cell switch. He flipped it. This time it was not a hologram. It was not a sound. It was a feeling. A wave of warmth washed over him. Not the warmth of a room, but the warmth of a sun. He felt light on his closed eyelids. He heard a sound that wasn't in his room. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children. A smell filled his nose, sweet, like pastries and flowers. A face appeared in his mind. It was the same woman from the first hologram, but she was not screaming. She was smiling. Her name came to him not as a sound, but as a knowing. Sumin. She was saying something, her eyes crinkling with joy. She held out a hand. The feeling was overwhelming. It was love. A deep, safe and happy love. It was a memory of a perfect day in a park on Earth. The image flickered. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, metallic chill. The smell of flowers was gone, replaced by the sterile, recycled air of a spaceship. The laughter was replaced by the low, nervous murmurs of people and the deep thrum of engines. He was in a troop bay. He could feel the vibration of the deck plates through his boots, boots that were not his. He saw other soldiers in similar gear, their faces grim. A name stenciled on a locker swam into view. Jan. A hand clapped him on the shoulder, and he felt a jolt of camaraderie, of shared fear. He saw his own hands, Tay's hands, checking a rifle. They were steady, but a cold knot of anxiety sat in his stomach. It was the anxiety of waiting, of knowing a fight was coming. Jay ripped the visor from his head, gasping. He was back in his room, his heart hammering. He was sweating. The feelings were so real, so intense. It wasn't like watching a movie. It was like being there for a few seconds. He was not just seeing Tay's memories. He was feeling his emotions. He looked at the helmet with a new kind of fear. This was more than he had bargained for. He was trespassing on a dead man's soul. Over the next week, his life fell into a new routine. Work his shift, eat, and then return to the helmet. He was careful, only connecting for short periods. Each time, he plunged deeper into Tay's final hours. He felt the jarring shudder as the Perseverance was hit by the first enemy volley. He heard the blaring alarm that meant battle stations. He saw the faces of Tay's squad, young men and women, their fear masked by training and dark humor. He felt the adrenaline, sharp and metallic, coursing through Tay's body. The memories were not in order. They were flashes, fragments of a life shattering, a shared cup of bad coffee with a friend named Hannah. The view from a viewport of strange, angry-looking alien ships. The sharp, electric smell of ozone from a fired plasma rifle, a desperate prayer whispered under his breath. Jay was no longer just a scrapyard worker. He was an archaeologist of a single human life. He was piecing together the story of Tay, a man who loved a woman named Sumin, who had friends named Jean and Hannah, and who was scared but determined to do his duty. He knew the final memory was coming, the one that ended in the explosion, the screaming, and the silence. He both dreaded it and felt a duty to see it. He owed Tay that much. To witness his end point one night, he sat down, the makeshift visor in his hands. He knew this would be the last session. He had to see how the story ended. He had to know what happened on the UNS Perseverance. He took a deep, steadying breath, put on the visor, and activated the helmet. The cold of the ship's deck bit deep. The air smelled of smoke and burned metal. The red emergency lights painted everything in a hellish glow. This was it, the last stand. The silence in Jay's small room was broken only by the hum of the life support system. He sat at his workbench, the makeshift visor in his hands. It was a tangle of wires and scrap metal, but it was his gateway. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that the next memory he would see would be the last. He would witness the death of the soldier. He took a deep, shaky breath. He thought of the smiling woman, Sumin. He thought of the quiet moments on the troop ship. He felt a duty to these ghosts. He had to see their story to its end. He put the visor on. The world of his room vanished. He was Tay. The feeling was immediate and total. He was no longer Jay, the scrapyard worker. He was a soldier, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was thick with smoke and a sharp, electric smell. His lungs burned with every breath. The ship, the UNS Perseverance, groaned and shuddered around him. A deep, metallic scream echoed through the corridor. Red emergency lights flashed, painting everyone and everything in a bloody glow. He was in a wide hallway marked engineering access. 5 other soldiers were with him, their faces pale and tight with fear. Their sergeant, a man named Park, had his back to a bulkhead, peering around the corner. "Hold the line!" Sergeant Park shouted, his voice raw. "They are coming again. They must not reach the core. The starfall is not clear." The name Starfall sparked a memory in Tay's mind, which Jay now shared. It was a civilian transport, a slow ship, packed with families and children. The Perseverance was their only shield against the Xylos battle group. They were all that stood between those people and death. Then Tay saw them, the Xylos. They were not like any enemy he had ever seen. They were tall and slender, moving with a silent, fluid grace that was more machine than living thing. Their bodies looked like they were made of polished white bone. They did not scream or shout. They advanced without a sound, their only noise the low hum of their energy weapons. Their silence was more terrifying than any war cry. "Fire!" Sergeant Park roared. Tay squeezed the trigger of his rifle. The weapon kicked in his hands. The corridor erupted in a storm of light. Bright lines of human plasma fire crossed paths with the sizzling blue bolts of the Xylos weapons. The noise was deafening. A soldier to his left, a young man named Choi, screamed and fell. A smoking hole was burned right through his chest. The smell was horrible. Tay's stomach turned, but his training took over. He kept firing. The memory flickered, jumping in time. Jay was seeing the most intense moments. The pieces of the battle burned deepest into Tay's mind. He saw Hannah, her back pressed against a metal wall, firing around a corner. She glanced at him. Their eyes met. There was no time for words, but her look said everything. It was a look of friendship, of fear, and of goodbye. A second later, a small, glowing device landed near her feet. A Xylos grenade. The explosion was a flash of white light and a thunderous roar. When the smoke cleared, Hannah was gone. Only a black mark on the wall remained. A sharp, hot pain of grief cut through Tay. Jay felt it as if it were his own. He had known Hannah for years. They had promised to share a meal when they got home. Now she was just gone. The Xylos were getting closer. Their energy bolts melted through the makeshift barricades. Sergeant Park was hit in the neck by a stray shot. He fell to the floor without a sound. The command channel in Tay's helmet was a mess of static and panicked voices from all over the ship. They were losing. Everywhere, they were losing. Then, a new voice cut through the chaos. It was the captain. Her voice was calm, but it had a heavy, final sound to it. "All hands, this is the captain. The Starfall has cleared the danger zone. They are safe." A small, choked sob of relief came from one of the soldiers near Tay. But the captain was not finished. The Xylos boarding parties have taken primary control. We cannot win this fight, but we can choose how we lose it. Jete listened, a cold dread filling him. I am starting the scuttle protocol. The reactor will be forced to explode. The blast will destroy this ship and every Xylos ship nearby. It will be a clean end. It will give the Starfall the time it needs to escape. A terrible silence fell over the comms. To the brave men and women of Engineering Access, the captain continued, her voice softening just a little. Your final duty is the most important. You must manually seal the primary blast door to this sector. The Xylos are trying to get to the engineering core to stop the overload. If they succeed, the Starfall is lost. You must hold them there. You must keep that door sealed until the end. I am so sorry. It has been the highest honor. The communication ended. Jete looked at the two other soldiers left with him. Jean, his friend from the troop bay, and a woman named Lee. Their faces were white. They understood. They were being asked to lock themselves in with the enemy, to die in the dark. Without a word, Jean ran to the huge manual control wheel for the blast door. It was a massive round hatch of thick metal. Lee and Tay joined him, putting all their strength into turning it. The wheel was stiff, groaning in protest. Through the narrowing gap of the door, Tay could see the Xylos warriors. They had realized what was happening. They were moving faster now, their silent, efficient movements finally showing a hint of urgency. The door was almost shut. Only a thin line of light remained. Go! Jean suddenly shouted, shoving Tay and Lee back from the door. Get to the secondary emergency hatch. It might still work. What about you? Lee yelled back, her voice cracking. I'll finish the seal. Go! Jin's face was a mask of fierce determination and raw fear. It was a suicide order. But it was a chance, a tiny chance, for two of them to live. Tay hesitated for a split second. The memory was filled with a storm of feelings. Duty, friendship, and the raw, animal need to survive. Lee grabbed Tay's arm, pulling him away. Come on! They turned and ran down a side corridor, toward a small, circular hatch marked emergency egress. Behind them, they heard the final, thunderous clang of the main blast door sealing shut. Jean was on the other side, alone. They reached the emergency hatch. Lee slammed her hand on the control panel. Nothing happened. She hit it again and again. It's dead. The power's gone. They were trapped. Tay turned around. At the end of the corridor, the first Xylos warrior stepped into view. It had found another way around. Its smooth, featureless head turned toward them. It raised its weapon. Lee raised her rifle, but she was too slow. A bright blue energy bolt hit her in the chest. She fell to the floor and did not move. Tay was alone. He backed against the dead hatch, his rifle feeling heavy and useless in his hands. The Xylos warrior advanced, its steps silent on the metal floor. It was not rushing. It knew he had nowhere to go. In that final moment, Tay's mind did not think of the Xylos. It did not think of the ship. It reached for a memory, a safe place. Jay was pulled into it. The warmth of the sun, the sound of leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Sumin's smiling face. She was handing him a small, white flower. Come back to me, Tay. She was saying, her voice full of light and hope. Promise you'll come back. The memory was so vivid, so beautiful, it was like a physical pain. The vision shattered. The cold, dark corridor snapped back into focus. The Xylos warrior was almost upon him. Tay's hand went to his helmet, his fingers pressing a specific sequence of buttons, activating the neural lock. A final record. He looked straight at the alien, and his fear was gone. There was only a deep, cold resolve. He slammed his fist down on the manual override for the emergency hatch. It wasn't for escape. It was a bulkhead lock. With a hiss of compressed air, heavy metal shutters slammed down over the corridor, sealing him and the Xylos warrior in this small, final space together. He had trapped the enemy. He had completed his duty. The Xylos warrior stopped. It seemed to understand. It raised its weapon one last time. Tay did not close his eyes. He thought of Sumin that a blinding blue light filled Jay's vision. A searing, unimaginable pain flashed through him. And then, nothing. A silent, eternal, black nothing. Jay tore the visor from his head, gasping for air. He stumbled away from the workbench, falling to his knees on the floor. He was crying, tears streaming down his face. He could still feel the ghost of that final, terrible pain. He could still see Sumin's smiling face, a beautiful memory in the middle of a nightmare. He had not just learned the story. He had lived the death. He lay on the cold floor, shaking, for a long time, staring at the silent, scarred helmet. He now knew the truth. Tay was not a casualty of a lost battle. He was a hero who had chosen to die so that thousands could live. And the universe had forgotten him. The memory of Tay's death was a cold stone in Jay's stomach. For 2 days, he moved through his life like a ghost. The scrapyard's noises were just distant echoes. The food he ate had no taste. At night, he dreamed of blue light and a smiling woman in a sunlit park. He would wake up gasping, the feeling of final, sealing doors slamming shut still ringing in his ears that he could not let it go. The weight of what he knew was crushing him. Tay, Jean, Hannah, Sergeant Park, Lee, they had all died for something. They had made a choice. They had saved a ship called the Starfall. Their story was one of incredible courage. And as far as the galaxy was concerned, it had never happened. He sat at his small table, the helmet in front of him. It was quiet now. The ghost inside had shown Jay everything. He felt a responsibility to Tay. He needed to know what the official record said. He needed to see the lie for himself. He booted up his old data terminal. It was a slow, clunky machine, only good for basic scrapyard inventory and approved Union news feeds. He had a low-level access code, just enough to look up ship registries and cargo manifests. He typed in the name, UNS Perseverance. The screen flickered. A search icon spun for a long moment. Then, a single, plain text entry appeared. Vessel. UNS Perseverance. Class. Guardian-class frigate. Status. Lost. Last known location. Xylos border conflict. Sector 7G. Official designation. Tactical retreat. Enemy engagement. Casualties total. All hands. Jay stared at the words. They were so clean. So empty. Tactical retreat. It made it sound like the ship was running away. It suggested failure, a mistake in judgment. There was no mention of a last stand. No mention of a civilian transport called the Starfall. No mention of a scuttled reactor or a heroic sacrifice. The deaths of Tay and his crew were just a number. A statistic in a forgotten war. A cold anger began to burn in Jay's chest. It started as a small spark and grew into a steady flame. This was wrong. It was a lie. The Galactic Union, in its desire to keep peace with the powerful Xylos, had erased the truth. They had turned a story of incredible human bravery into a simple report of a defeat. They had made Tay's choice meaningless. He needed more. He needed to know about the Starfall. He tried searching for it. His terminal flashed a warning. Restricted access. Information classified. Inquiry logged. A chill ran down his spine. The inquiry was logged. That meant someone somewhere might see that he was looking. A scrapyard worker had no business asking about classified civilian transports. He quickly shut down the terminal, his heart pounding. He was just one man, alone on a remote rock. The Galactic Union was vast and powerful. Who was he to challenge their story? He looked over at the helmet. It sat on his workbench, silent and patient. He thought of Tay's face in the final moment. There had been no regret, only resolve. Tay had done his duty, not for glory, not for a record in a database, but because it was the right thing to do. Jay knew then that he could not stay silent. He had to do something. But what? He couldn't send a message to the official news feeds. They were controlled by the Union. His message would be deleted and he would be arrested. Then he remembered the hauler comms. The scrapyard was visited by independent cargo haulers. They were rough, private operators who moved scrap metal and other low-value goods between the outer systems. They didn't like the Union. They often used unregistered, high-powered communication arrays to talk to each other, to bypass union fees and monitoring. It was illegal, but everyone looked the other way. Jay knew a little about how they worked. He had fixed a few of their devices. He knew their signals were raw and powerful, and they could broadcast on open channels, flooding the public data nodes that anyone could access. It was like shouting in a crowded market. The union could eventually stop the shout, but not before a lot of people had heard it. A plan began to form in his mind. It was a dangerous, stupid plan. It was treason. If he was caught, he would spend the rest of his life in a prison asteroid. He spent the next few days watching, learning. He noted when the haulers came and went. He identified their ships and their communication schedules. He saw the tall, dish-shaped antenna on one of the older, more beat-up freighters, the Stray Minnow. Its captain was a grizzled old man named Goran who hated paperwork. Jay's plan was simple. He would wait for the right moment. He would tap into the Stray Minnow's comms array. He would not send a text or a formal complaint. No one would read that. He would broadcast the raw, emotional truth. He would send out Tay's final memory, the one he had experienced through the helmet. He would let the galaxy feel what he had felt. He would show them the face of the Xylos warrior, the sealing of the blast door, the love for Sumin, and the final, painful nothingness. He would make them remember the man the Union wanted them to forget. He prepared his equipment. He modified his data slate to hold the memory file from the helmet. He built a small, powerful transmitter that could link to the hauler's array for just a few minutes. That was all he would need. A few minutes to shout the truth into the void. He chose a date. The anniversary of the Battle of the Perseverance, according to the helmet's internal clock. Felt right. A memorial for a death that was never mourned. The night arrived. The scrapyard was quiet. The Stray Minnow was docked for loading, its crew asleep. Jay moved through the shadows of the giant scrap piles, a small bag of tools and his data slate in his hand. His heart was a drum in his chest. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made him jump. He reached the service panel at the base of the comms array. His hands trembled as he used a magnetic lockpick to open it. Inside was a jungle of wires and circuits. He found the main data conduit. Working quickly, he spliced in his transmitter and connected his data slate. He looked at the screen. The file was ready. It was titled, Final Memory Protocol 3. He took one last, deep breath. He thought of Tay and Jean and Hannah. He thought of the smiling face of Sumin. He thought of the thousands of people on the Starfall who were alive because of them. He pressed the button. A light on his transmitter glowed green. A status bar on his slate began to move. Broadcasting. It read. The memory of Tay's final moments was now flying through space. A digital ghost on an unregistered channel, aimed at the heart of the civilized galaxy. Jay had done it. He had given the helmet its voice. He disconnected his equipment, closed the panel, and melted back into the shadows. He walked back to his module, his whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear. He had lit a fuse. Now, he could only wait for the explosion. The wait was the worst part. For 2 days, nothing happened. The scrapyard operated as it always did. The smelter glowed. The cranes moved. Jay went to work, did his job, and came home, his nerves stretched tight like wires. Every time he saw a foreman, he expected to be grabbed. Every time his data terminal chimed, he thought it was a security alert. He barely slept. He just sat in his room, staring at the walls, waiting for the end to come. On the third day, the silence broke. IT started as a murmur on the break room news feed. A reporter was talking about unverified data packets and disturbing historical claims. Jay's heart leapt into his throat. He watched, trying to look casual. The report was vague, but they mentioned the UNS Perseverance. By the next day, it was everywhere. The broadcast had worked. It had spread through the public data nodes like a virus. News organizations, unable to ignore the story their viewers were already seeing, picked it up. They didn't just report the facts. They showed parts of the memory. The face of the Xylos warrior. The final, loving thought of Sumin. The terrible, silent sacrifice. The galaxy was captivated. This was not a dry military report. This was a raw human story. People felt like they were there. They felt Tay's fear and his courage. They were outraged that this truth had been hidden. The name Tay became a symbol. The phrase he remembered started appearing on social feeds. The Galactic Union was caught completely off guard. At first, they tried to deny it. They called it a sophisticated fabrication. But the memory data was too real, too technically accurate to be fake. Experts confirmed its authenticity. Then, survivors from the starfall began to speak out. They told their stories. They confirmed that the Perseverance had died to save them. They talked about watching the ship's explosion on their sensors, knowing what it meant. The Union was forced to change its story. They issued a brief statement, acknowledging the revised historical details of the Perseverance's final mission. It was a cold, political correction. It did nothing to calm the public anger. Jay watched it all from his small module, a strange mix of triumph and dread growing inside him. He had done it. He had told the truth. But he knew it was only a matter of time before they found him. The end came on the morning of the 5th day. Jay was about to leave for his shift when a sleek, black Union shuttle descended from the sky. It didn't land at the main port. It came straight to the scrapyard, its engines kicking up a cloud of dust. It was an enforcement vessel. 3 figures stepped out. 2 were large security officers in dark armor, their faces hidden behind helmets. They carried pulse rifles. The person in front was a woman. She wore the sharp, gray uniform of a Union inspector. She had short, black hair and a severe, expressionless face. She held a data slate in her hand. Jay stood frozen by his door. His blood ran cold. It was over. The foreman, a nervous man, pointed directly at Jay. The inspector nodded and walked toward him, the 2 officers following like shadows. "Jay?" the inspector said. Her voice was calm and flat, like a machine. Jay could only nod. "I am Inspector Ryo of the Galactic Union Compliance Division." She looked down at her slate. "You are charged with unauthorized access of a classified military artifact, illegal data interception, piracy of a Union communication frequency, and broadcasting seditious material. Do you understand these charges?" Jay found his voice, though it was a whisper. "Yes." "Where is the device?" she asked. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He turned and led them into his module. He pointed to the workbench, where the helmet sat next to his tangle of wires and tools. Inspector Ryo walked over to it. She did not touch it. She just looked at it for a long, quiet moment. Her eyes moved over the scars, the cracked visor, the faded name T. Her severe expression did not change. But Jay saw her jaw tighten just a little. One of the officers picked up the helmet and placed it in a sealed evidence case. The other officer took Jay's data slate and his homemade transmitter. "Turn around," Inspector Ryo said. Her voice was still cold. Jay turned, his heart pounding. He felt the cold, hard click of magnetic restraints around his wrists. This was it. He was going to prison. He thought of the endless gray walls, the loss of his freedom. A wave of fear washed over him. He had known this was possible, but feeling the cuffs on his skin made it terrifyingly real. The officers began to lead him out of the module. As they passed Inspector Ryo, she was still looking at the now empty space on the workbench where the helmet had been. Jay stopped. He didn't know why he did it. He just had to say something. He had to make her understand. "It wasn't seditious material," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "It was the truth. He was a hero. They all were." Inspector Ryo turned her head slowly. Her dark eyes met his. For a second, the cold, official mask seemed to slip. He saw something else there, a deep, old pain. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She took a step closer to him, her voice dropping so only he could hear it. "It was a foolish thing you did," she said. The words were sharp, an official reprimand. But then her gaze flickered toward the evidence case holding the helmet, and back to him. Her voice became even quieter, almost a whisper. "My brother was on that civilian transport." Jay stared at her, the words not making sense at first. Then understanding dawned. The Starfall, the civilian ship. Her brother was one of the thousands who had lived because Tay had died. Inspector Ryo held his gaze for one more second. In her eyes, he saw no gratitude, No forgiveness. He saw only a complicated, painful truth. Then the mask was back. She gave a sharp nod to the officers. "Take him away," she said, her voice flat and official once more. The officers led Jay out into the dusty light and toward the black shuttle. He didn't resist. As he was guided up the ramp, he took one last look at the scrapyard. He saw the foreman watching, his mouth open. He saw the endless piles of forgotten junk. He had come here to be forgotten too. But he had chosen to be remembered. He had chosen to make sure Tay was remembered. The shuttle door closed with a heavy, final sound, sealing him in darkness. He was a criminal. He had lost his freedom. But as the shuttle lifted off, carrying him to an unknown fate, a strange feeling settled over him. It was not happiness. It was not victory. It was peace. The helmet had remembered everything. And now, so would everyone else. The inside of the Union holding cell was exactly as gray and cold as Jay had imagined. There was a cot, a small sink, and a toilet. There were no windows. A single, dim light glowed from the ceiling. Time lost its meaning. He did not know if it was day or night. He slept fitfully, his dreams filled with the sounds of battle and the sight of a smiling woman in a sunlit park. He was taken out for questioning only once. The interrogators were not cruel, but they were relentless. They asked him about the helmet. They asked him how he had bypassed the security. They wanted to know if he had help. He told them the truth. He told them he found it, he fixed it, and he listened to its story. He told them he acted alone. They did not seem to believe him, but they could not prove otherwise. After the questioning, he was returned to his cell. The silence and the waiting were the hardest part. He had no news from the outside. He did not know what was happening in the galaxy. He wondered if anyone remembered him, or if his story had already been forgotten, replaced by the next big news. Days turned into what felt like weeks. He spent his time staring at the blank walls, thinking about his life. He thought about the scrapyard, the monotony, the quiet loneliness. He had been content to be forgotten. But now he realized he did not want to be. He wanted his life to mean something, even if it was just this one thing. One day, the door to his cell slid open with a quiet hiss. It was not mealtime. Inspector Ryo stood there. She was alone. She did not have the two security officers with her. She held a data slate in one hand. "Come with me," she said. Her voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Jay stood up, his body stiff from the cot. He followed her out of the cell and down a long, sterile corridor. They did not go to an interrogation room. Instead, she led him to a small, private office. It had a window, and Jay was startled to see the stars outside. They were in a space station. "Sit," Inspector Ryo said, pointing to a chair in front of a simple desk. She sat down on the other side. Jay sat, his heart beating fast. This was different. This felt important. Inspector Ryo placed the data slate on the desk between them. She did not look at him at first. She looked out the window at the stars. "The broadcast you sent," she began, her voice still carefully controlled. "It caused a significant problem for the Union. It forced them to admit they had lied. It created a political crisis with the Xylos. They are very angry." Jay said nothing. He waited. "The official charges against you are very serious," she continued. "Unauthorized access, data piracy, sedition. The punishment for these crimes is a lifetime of hard labor on a prison planet." Jay felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked down at his hands. "However," Inspector Ryo said, and he looked up. She was now looking directly at him. "The public response to your broadcast has been overwhelming. The story of the Perseverance has become a symbol of human sacrifice, of truth. There have been memorials, speeches. They are building a monument on Mars for Tay and his crew. The crew of the Starfall started a fund for the families of the Perseverance. They raised millions of credits." Jay listened, hardly daring to breathe. He had not known any of this. "You are seen by many as a hero," she said, and the words sounded strange in her calm, official voice. "A whistleblower. The man who found the truth in a scrapyard. Arresting you was a necessary procedure. But convicting you? That has become a political impossibility. The union would look like it was punishing the person who exposed its own lie. She slid the data slate across the desk toward him. On the screen was a legal document. This is a conditional release order, she said. All charges are being dropped. You are a free man. Jay stared at the screen. The words swam in front of his eyes. He could not believe it. He was free. The heavy weight that had been crushing him for weeks suddenly lifted. He felt lightheaded. There is one condition, Inspector Ryo said. You can never speak publicly about this. You can never discuss the helmet, the broadcast, or your time in custody. Officially, this never happened. Do you understand? Jay nodded slowly. I understand. He would have agreed to anything. Inspector Ryo stood up. Your personal effects have been returned to you. A transport is waiting to take you to the nearest civilian station. You can go anywhere you want. Jay stood up, his legs feeling weak. He was free. He could go anywhere. But where would he go? Back to the scrapyard? The thought made him feel empty. He walked to the door, but he stopped and turned back. Inspector Ryo was standing by the window again, her back to him. Inspector, he said softly. She did not turn around. Yes, your brother, Jay said. Is he okay? There was a long silence. He thought she would not answer. He is an engineer now, she said. Her voice so quiet he almost couldn't hear it. He has a family, 2 children. She paused. He would have died that day. Jay nodded. Even though she couldn't see him, he understood now. Her coldness was not anger at him. It was the pain of a terrible debt. A debt owed to a dead man she would never know. Paid by a scrapyard worker she had to arrest. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was thanking her for. He left the office and was led to the transport bay. He was given a bag with his old clothes and a small amount of money. He boarded a small passenger shuttle. A few hours later, he was on a busy space station, surrounded by the noise and lights of thousands of people. He found a quiet seat in a food court and turned on a public news terminal. The story was still everywhere. He saw images of the proposed monument on Mars. He saw interviews with historians talking about the Battle of the Perseverance. He saw a picture of Tae, a young man in a uniform, smiling. Next to him was a picture of Sumin. She was crying, but she was holding a medal they had given her posthumously for Tae. Jay watched it all, a strange feeling filling his chest. He had done it. He had pulled one story out of the mountain of forgotten things. He had given Tae and his crew back their names. He would never be famous. No one would ever know his role. He would have to keep the secret forever. But that was okay. He did not need the credit. He had the memory. He bought a ticket on a ship heading toward the core worlds. He did not know what he would do there. Maybe he would find a new job. Maybe he would just live. For the first time in a long time, the future felt open. As his ship pulled away from the station, he looked out the viewport at the endless stars. Somewhere out there was the scrapyard and the ghost of a ship called the Perseverance. And somewhere, too, was the memory of a man who had kept his promise, and a woman waiting in the sun. The helmet had remembered everything, and now so would he.